Hey y'all, so this week we are finishing our dragon eye by adding a value layer to our colors. And we'll be doing this by using our tints, tones, and shades. Let's get started. First, we need to bring in our picture of the dragon eye. So click on the three little dots, the box with the arrow pointing in and photos, and hit the check mark when you're done. For this layer, we're only going to use two tools the whole time. That's going to be the paint roller tool and the smudge tool. So first, we're going to start with the paint roller. And I'm going to choose the second square. If your drawing is using much lighter colors, use the first one. Or if your drawing is darker, you can move down to the middle. But I'm using the second square. And we don't really want to shade with black. We want to get a color really close to it. So I'm going to choose blue. But I'm going to make it a tone of blue and make it really dark and kind of gray. And when I'm finished, I'll hit modify. So your darkest shadow is actually going to be right under your top eyelid if our light is coming from above our dragon eye. So I'm going to do a few layers of this shape that mimics our eyelid. We're also going to add shadows in the corners of the eye, and this helps make our eye look more rounded, like a sphere. Remember, if you make any mistakes, you can just hit the undo button. You can also just erase because your dragon eye is on a different layer than your shading. And when you're happy with where your shadows have been placed or where your shades are, you can go ahead and smudge those out. Don't smudge out outside of the eye, so don't go into the eyelid yet. Make sure you're staying in the iris and actually what would be the wet part of our eye. Now here I felt like I needed a little bit darker shadow right underneath my top eyelid because that will be the darkest place in our picture. So I'm just going to draw that back in, but this time I'm not smudging that one out. I'm going to leave it there. Now I think it's easier to shade going downwards because our light is coming from above. So our next shadow would be underneath our bottom eyelid, and then it would be underneath each layer of scales. I'm also adding shadows where our scales are overlapping. No matter what your scale shape is, or where you're placing them, or if you have layers of scales or not, you can just add in a shadow at the bottom of each scale as long as it mimics the shape of the scale. So our little scales are almost like semicircles, so I'm doing little crescent shapes at the bottom of each one to give it a little bit of shading. When you're smudging your shadows, be sure not to smudge too much because you don't want to lose your shadow completely. The purpose of smudging is to blend it in to make it make more sense so it's not so harsh. Now moving on to the top, you're going to shade in a very similar way, still making sure that your shadows are at the bottom of each scale because remember our light is coming from above. But when you're doing this, if you have horns or anything else, make sure that you're not shading your horns yet. They shouldn't have any shading on them at all. We are just working on our scales. Your shadows on your horns are going to mimic the same shape as your horn, but make sure they're on the opposite side from your light source. So notice I have to actually switch directions on this bottom horn. Now that my shading is right, I'm not actually smudging out the horns because the horns are supposed to be shinier than the scales, so the shadows are going to be more harsh. Now using the same exact tool, all that's different is that I chose white ink. I'm now going to draw an oval right in the middle of our eye. And then I'm going to move all the way down to the bottom square, or the whitest square, and add in some really, really bright highlights in the corner of the eye where the tear duct should be, and 2 white highlights in the middle of the eye. I'm going to actually smudge out the bottom of the oval, but I'm going to leave the top of it unsmudged. And that's it. Your dragon eye is officially finished. Now I am going to put some gradient maps or some step-by-step directions at the end of this video. They may be more helpful to you, but I'm actually leaving out the scales portion because everybody's scales look so different.